So let's get right into it. So I'm Dexter Wimberly. I'm a senior critic at New York Academy of Art. I'm excited for today's conversation. It's a much needed one. Radical budgeting for visual artists. I want to start by introducing our guest today. Yanely Espinal is a Brooklyn-born ball of energy. She's an educator with a gift for storytelling and a passion for explaining financial concepts in a straightforward way. While working as an elementary school teacher, she decided to change her financial life by paying off $20,000 of debt in just 18 months. In 2015, she started Miss Be Helpful, a YouTube channel that now has over 4 million views to help others learn the money skills she never learned in school. Her book, Mind Your Money, was released in May of 2023 and quickly became an Amazon bestseller, with thousands of copies sold in the first month. Yanely is a director of educational outreach for Next Gen Personal Finance, a nonprofit working to ensure that every high school student gets a full semester of personal finance education. She also hosts the Financially Inclined from Marketplace, a video podcast for teens about money lessons for living life on your own way. Her Instagram handle is @MissBeHelpful. Yanely, thank you for joining us today. You can unmute yourself and let's get right into the conversation.
Let's do it. Thank you so much, Dexter, for inviting me. I love this conversation. Like, I feel like we do not talk enough about the non-traditional approaches to money out there. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I just read your bio, of course, but bios always leave something out, and I just love to give you a moment to, share a little bit more about yourself, maybe a couple of things that are not in the bio that you think people should know.
Yeah, well, first of all, my degree back here behind me is in visual arts. So I actually, one of my concentrations at Brown when I was an undergrad was visual arts. I also studied history of art and architecture and urban studies. So, performing and visual arts have been in my bones and in my blood since I was a kid. I took a lot of art classes in middle school, and in high school I went to LaGuardia High School for visual and performing arts in New York City. So I spent half of my day making visual art projects and taking illustration classes and computer art classes and all kinds of classes, anatomy, and then eventually had to make a decision if I was going to go to art school or not. That was one of the toughest decisions I ever made. And honestly, it was a purely financial one because my parents are immigrants from the Dominican Republic. They don't, speak English. They didn't have a lot of education, any money, any social capital. And so for me, I'd have to come out of pocket to pay for college completely on my own. And most of the art schools that I applied to, Pratt, SCAD, RISD, while I got accepted, didn't give me really any financial aid. At most maybe $10,000, $12,000 a year, and these schools cost tens of thousands of dollars. So I just immediately, I knew art school was kind of going to be out of the question for me, which is a little heartbreaking, but I did get to take some classes at RISD, and I did continue to do art as a passion at Brown. And then eventually I decided that, I had more of a passion for education. It was going to break my heart to be sitting in front of students teaching them about art when they can't read. And so I chose to, really completely pivot over to education. And that's why I became a teacher. But for those of you who didn't know, a little bit of that fun kind of fact about me and my background has definitely always been rooted in the arts.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm sure most of our audience here are people who either identify as artists or certainly are in the creative field. Yeah. I know you have a presentation today, so let me know how you'd like to do this. We can get into your presentation and then I can ask you questions as we go.
Let's do it where you ask me questions. Let's do it where you ask me questions, and then I can share the slides that are pertinent to those questions, because I feel like it's better than just doing a presentation first off the bat.
No, that makes sense. I just wanted to, do whatever's most comfortable for you. So, okay, cool. Obviously the conversation about budgeting, you ask the average person, it's a big snooze, right? The first thing is like, oh, who wants to talk about that? But our lives are kind of ruled by budgeting, whether we like it or not. I believe that. I mean, whether you make a budget or you don't make a budget, right, you are actually living on a budget. It is your budget, right? So you can either acknowledge it or ignore it. Artists in particular, I know there are a lot of cliches around artists. I've been working in the arts for almost 20 years. So I've heard all the cliches about artists aren't good with money and and they don't think about it. And I believe that there is some truth that the population in general can be divided into people who think about their personal finances all the time and people who don't think about their finances at all. And some of those people who don't are artists, but some of those people who don't are just everyday people who are not artists at all. So the stereotype doesn't really hold up. Right. In your experience, why do you think that people in the arts, or people who have incomes that kind of like fluctuate wildly, ignore their budgets?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is because the nature of being a creative person. I'm gonna pull up my slides, but I may or may not reference some of them here. But
Sure.
let's see. Nope, I want to share just the slides. There we go. Okay, so I think the nature of being a creative person, obviously you're comfortable thinking creative ideas and big thoughts, right? Which generally tend to be in the abstract a lot of times. So because we're so we think very abstractly and we're comfortable thinking abstractly, it can be tougher to switch modes and almost compartmentalize our thinking in a way where we can easily turn that off and go now to a very tactical, practical, spreadsheet based type of approach to a project plan or to budgeting. And so I think this is in general just kind of tough for people who tend to be big thinkers, innovators, creative minds. We're just more comfortable in that abstract space. And that's kind of where our mode is generally like default, go to, think big, come up with ideas, think creatively, which doesn't always tend to be associated with budgeting and financial planning. And you mentioned like one of the things that you talked about was like income that fluctuates. For me, I think it's really hard to manage something that you're not measuring. And so for a lot of times, when you're an artist, you have certain aspects of your work that are very measured and calculated. But for the most part, there's more chaos, honestly, when you're a creative professional than anything, because of the fact that your income fluctuates and can be unpredictable at times. You can take on project-based work or freelance gigs. If you're a full-time artist, maybe you're doing self-employment, so you have to deal with and factor in self-employment taxes, which sometimes if you don't account for, you might think you've got everything under control. And then all of a sudden you get this surprise bill when you're dealing with your taxes. Out-of-pocket costs, right? If you have a traditional type of job or traditional employment, of course, you're going to have, those traditional types of benefits packages, your retirement plan sponsored by your employer, your health insurance sponsored by your employer. You don't get that when you are just pursuing art and not doing it in a traditional setting or pathway. So you're going to have more out-of-pocket costs. You're going to have debt that you might be, having to repay, whether that be student loan debt or debt for your business loan or what have you. And then, of course, you're trying to think about long-term, right? We're so focused on the work that we're doing, especially as creative artists. You're so passionate about being in the work, right? Like I oftentimes had to force myself to leave the studio in college at night and just go home, because then I would come back to it the next day with fresh eyes. I mean, I know so many creative people are going to relate to that, but that you almost have to do that constantly with your money too. You have to pull yourself away from the moment right now and think long-term about how can you create a sustainable career path for yourself in this creative field that you're in. Because if you just focus on this project or this month or this week or this particular piece I'm working on or this deal that I'm going to get, you're not thinking about the sustainability, which really is only something you can plan for in the long term. And so essentially, I would say that budgeting matters so much more for you when you're creative. And of course, there's challenges to it. But when you budget, it really surfaces this clarity for you, right? Clear financial picture that gives you peace of mind. I mean, for me, it's given me a lot of peace of mind. It doesn't mean that everything's perfect and cookie cutter and like wonderful, but I have felt a lot more freedom to be able to focus on creative things like writing a book, or creating a course or offering something that is a much more, non-traditional than just your typical 9-to-5 desk job or even typical 9-to-5 employment that's not at a desk. So I think not having that constant financial stress is going to make you a better artist. It's going to allow you to be, to be able to pursue your passions even more and not constantly carry around that stress, that concern, that worry about the financial aspect of it, because you got that covered.
Yeah, well, you said so much, and I want to kind of unpack some of it. Would you mind going back to the first slide?
Yeah, let's do it.
And the reason I want you to go back to the slide is this is a quote that I think of often. And not just in terms of budget, but in terms of other aspects of my life, even in terms of family.
Yeah.
But this idea of that you can't manage what you don't measure. I mean, I think it's just such an important quote, because I know so many people in the creative field who do in fact ignore the financial side of their life. And it's a combination, I think, of things that I've gone through as well. It's like there's a little bit of fear, there's some regret. There is a sort of like, this idea that optimism is a plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And optimism is not a plan.
Right.
And so I just want to just kind of like really drill down on this idea that this whole idea of like radical budgeting. Like why is this called radical budgeting? Because I want to explore like the idea of like people pushing themselves out of their comfort zones, right? And in order to do that, you have to acknowledge your situation and be realistic about it, regardless of how much money you're making and how that money fluctuates. You have to be real about it. Know what you have in the bank, know what you have coming in, and then also, as equally important, know what you need.
Yes.
Right. And if you know what you have coming in, and you know what you need, you have a clear picture of what you need to do.
Yeah.
Right. And that could be as simple as, and it's easy to say, make more money. I mean, to even say it sounds, I laugh to myself, because who doesn't want to make more money, right?
Duh.
Most people do.
Yeah.
But there actually are people who need to make more money desperately, but aren't taking the steps to do that because they fear that if they create another way of earning income as an artist, they won't be taken as seriously as an artist because they have another job, so to speak. That's a psychological box that people sometimes put themselves in. And we've both seen that.
Absolutely.
But the world changes when your financial pressures start to go down a bit.
Yeah.
So much more about your life changes, right? You find that you have time to go, time to go to the dentist.
Yep.
You have you have time, it's like little things that people put off for inordinate amounts of time because of like money pressures and stress. So we can go back to your next slide, but I just wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about that. So
I love that you brought us back here. And I want to add one thing here. This quote, it struck me a couple years ago when I first heard it, because it was used in a context of measuring and tracking. So for me, the word measure is it focuses on the math of it, but really it's the behavior that matters more than the math. So the radical part of budgeting as a creative, to me, is that you got to not think of it as a math problem, because for a lot of people, that's the part that's like, I'd rather do anything but solve a math problem right now. But it's more of an art project. It's more of a behavioral, artistic aspect. It's not necessarily the running of the numbers. So for me, that means tracking your money. It doesn't sound as mathematical as measuring your money or measuring your spending, right? So for me, it's you can't manage what you don't measure. Really means to me that you need to have some sort of tracking system, whatever that tracking system is going to be, that's going to work best for you. It's going to look different for you than it is for me. It's going to look different for Dexter. It's going to look different for everybody, right? Everyone's going to have the way that works best for them based on their preferences, based on, whatever it is that they're going to want to look at weekly, monthly, daily, or what have you. So for me, tracking was the key, because when you think about success in any field or in any area where you want to reach a goal, or you want not even reach a goal, you want to progress, you want to be better tomorrow than you were today. Most of us would agree. Almost everybody would say, yeah, I want to be better tomorrow with my money than I am today with my money. Everybody wants to be better with money, right? Not worse. So to me, that means when you think about folks that like are in sports, right, in athletic positions, right, what they have to do, they have to track their progress if they want to actually improve. So if that's basketball, 100 free throws today in 5-6 minutes, how many can I do tomorrow in 5 or 6 minutes? I'm going to keep timing myself and see, can I get more free throws in that time than I did yesterday? Can I do more tomorrow? And you have no idea unless you're tracking what you've done, right? Your athletic performance has got to be tracked, and there's all kinds of tests and trackers and things used for that. Same thing when you're thinking about your goals, right? So every year in the new year, people are so dedicated to thinking of goals. I want to do this more, I want to move more, I want to save more, I want to do all these things. But if you don't write those goals down, if you don't have a way to track it, there's no way for you to know if you're progressing towards those goals. And for me now, I mean, I could give you a very personal example. I'm working with a fitness trainer. I'm trying to get my fitness right, and it's hard. He's like pushing me that I gotta track not only how often I move, but what I'm eating and how much I'm eating, and like tracking that to make sure that it's enough. And that was shocking to me because, he's like, you got to have 10 times, what you would think you need, like in protein. So for me, most people would think, oh, you got to cut down what you're eating. But my problem was I wasn't eating enough. I wasn't eating enough protein in order to reach my fitness goals. So if I wasn't measuring or tracking, how much my intake is or how much I'm moving and my calorie burning and all of this, how can I know if I'm progressing towards the goal that I've set with my trainer, right? So to me, when you think of the word measure, if that is in any way intimidating because it's so heavy on the math, think more of your behaviors, think more of what your actions are going to be and how you can make sure that you're tracking the things that you're doing so you're moving more in the right direction. And when it comes to money, that just means tracking your spending, having a place to track your savings, right? And tracking your debt. Ultimately, those are the three things that you need to track. Your spending is your money now, your debt is your money in the past, and your money in the future is going to be what you want to be investing and setting aside. And so for me, that's really the key is the tracking of it all, not necessarily being intimidated by the math problem that it can feel like it is.
Thank you. Let's go back to the second slide. And,
Yeah.
I think I think a big part of this that I want to unpack here, a word that we haven't used yet, but I'm sure it's relevant for this conversation. And that word is discipline, right?
Mm.
So I think that whether someone is making, it doesn't matter. If someone's making $100 a week, $1,000 a week, $10,000 a week, $100,000 a week. I mean,
Right.
again, I know some people are like $100,000 a week. That'd be nice. But my point is, whatever amount of money you're making,
Yep.
it's going to be a disaster for you if you don't put discipline into the equation. And what do I
Right.
mean by that? If you don't account for things like taxes, and you're making $100,000 a week or a year or whatever, you're going to get clobbered when it comes time to pay taxes if you're self-employed and you're not putting money aside. So it doesn't matter if you're making a lot of money, and if you don't have discipline, it's still going to have the same end result.
That's right.
You're going to be in debt. You're going to be in the hole. So let's talk a little bit about some of the tactics that you've recommended to people as they think about getting themselves on track. And I'll throw one out there just to kind of get the ball rolling. You've shared a lot about your personal life in terms of like your financial journey, and so I'm not saying anything right now that isn't already like in your bio or things you've talked about in interviews. But being in a tremendous amount of debt is incredibly scary. And also not having much money in the bank while you're also in a tremendous amount of debt and not knowing where your future income is coming from. Those three things can be crippling. And when years ago, when the financial crisis, like people always like talk about that, like in some weird sort of way, but we all like live through it if we're old enough. I'd found myself in a somewhat similar situation because my business had gone down and couldn't get new clients and used up all my savings and all of these things. And again, this is going back to 2008 or so. I had to figure out what was going to be my first step to getting back on track, because I felt like I needed a first step. And my first step was, and this is an old adage that I was in fact going to do, and that was going to be pay myself first. Right. So we've all heard that, I guess, and it could mean different things to different people. But what it meant to me was every dollar I earned, there was a portion of that was going to stay with me, no matter what. Now that I would account for the fact that I had to pay taxes, I'd account for my expenses, but I wasn't going to let either of those things stop me from keeping a portion of the money that I was making with me. 20%, 25% at times, but I wasn't going to get to an end of a year having made whatever amount of money I've made and have nothing to show for it.
That's right.
I wasn't going to do that. So I'll hand it over to you.
I love that because how long can you continue to do that for? Like really, if you think about the point of making a living, doing something that you love is so that you can feel like, every single day I'm doing something that I enjoy, or for the most part, my days are made up of things that I'm really passionate about and that I enjoy, rather than having to do things that I would rather not do, but simply because I need the money. And so for how long can you go on not having anything set aside at the end of the year? There's going to come a point where you're going to want to stop working. And that's a really harsh reality, to get to that point and have that really tough pill to swallow, that you don't have anything set aside And while there are loans for college, you can take out a student loan. While there are loans for home ownership, you can take out a home mortgage loan. There's loans for starting a business. There's business loans and small business loans out there. There's no such thing as a loan for retirement. It doesn't exist. I've never heard of retirement loans. They don't exist. So it's so important that you put your future self first. And by paying yourself first, by setting aside something every single time you make money, every dollar you bring for yourself, that's your promise to your future self that one day you can take it easy. One day you can stop and enjoy, the fruits of your labor, so to speak, right? Because we work so hard and we work so long. And then it's so hard to get to the point where, and I see this all the time. I see in my family, older folks who reach a certain age and they want to stop working. They're ready to stop working, but financially they can't afford to. So that's so key. I find that a lot of people get stuck in the logistics, but how do I do this? Do I take the cash out of my bank account and make cash envelopes? Do I get a paper and a pen? I'm artistic. Maybe I should do that. Or is it a spreadsheet? I don't like trackers and spreadsheets. That's not my thing. Is there an app on my phone or an iPad or my laptop that I can use? Should I make a note? The reality is it does not matter. What matters is what your point was earlier, Dexter, which is the discipline. Are you actually going to open this thing up consistently, frequently, on a specific basis that works for you, weekly, monthly, whatever that might be, biweekly? But you have to commit to looking at this thing over and over again, because most people think that the word budget is just a noun, right? It's just a thing. It's a plan that I made with categories and my income on one side and my expenses on the other, and the difference over here. But that's just one form of the word budget. Budget is also a verb. To budget means that you're going to sit at your table, pull up your budget and review it and track your progress from the last time that you accounted for your different categories of spending to see, okay, where am I now versus where I said I was going to be and where I want to be? Am I over budget? Am I under budget? Am I okay? Am I on track to be able to meet this spending goal for this month? And that's the part most people don't get. You can get as far as to create the budget, but then the actual budgeting, the verb part, doesn't actually happen. So to me, making this choice here about like how to do it, it's whatever way is most likely to get you to show up with discipline consistently. So for me, that's a spreadsheet. And so I'm going to show y'all my spreadsheet here on the screen, which I made into like a little template that I share with folks online. So basically, here's a month of the budget. So let's use November of 2023 as an example. I'm going to go through here and I'm going to put all the different sources of income that I have. And I'm going to track. We got to start with tracking. I'm going to track my income on this side. Multiple different sources. I have 4 sources here, and then other categories, which might be other sources of income. Now, you're not going to touch any of the green cells here because it's a template. You don't want to mess with those, but your yellow boxes or cells are where you can, edit. So for me, I'm going to go in here and type all the different sources of income and the amounts there. That's going to populate a total amount up here. And then what that does is it gives me a categorical breakdown by percentage. Because what I find is that before I was budgeting by amounts. I'd be like, okay, let me set aside $200 for my groceries. That feels kind of right to me. Let me set aside $75 for, this for entertainment. That feels right to me because I was in the abstract. Everything felt right for me. But that didn't really work for me because I wasn't actually looking at the amount I was spending relative to my income. How do you know if something's a lot or a little bit? You don't. It's relative to your income. For one person to go and spend $5,000 on groceries for their family, well, if they're making $5 million, that's fine. But for me, that doesn't make sense because I want to make sure my spending on food is a certain percentage of my income. So this actually really helped me organize my finances to break it down by percentage. So I'll give an example here. I'll say, I got a $3,000 project that came in. Another one that was $1,500. I did a speaking engagement. They paid me $4,000. And, and then maybe I sold something on Etsy, $500. And then my grandma gave me a birthday card with $50 in it. Okay, so there we go. There's all my income. This month I made $9,050. Amazing. That's a really nice income. But now I still have to remember my spending's got to be relative to that. So 10% of my income should immediately be set aside for my emergency savings. Now, this is Dexter, to your point, pay yourself first. I write in here, it's got to be a high yield savings. there's so many places you can park money, and any bank account's going to be a good, safe place to put your money, but it's not going to be the place that's going to grow your money the most. Specifically a high yield savings accounts, which most are going to be online today, that's going to be the best place to park your money that's meant for you, for future you. So for me, that's 10%. So right away, $905 at minimum is going to go into my savings. So my actual spending I can write in. Now, some months might be rough and I can't reach that. That's fine. Maybe I'll write in a smaller amount. But my goal, what I'm trying to make sure I do, is account for a percentage-based amount of spending. So here, my rent ideally is going to be 28% of my income. So I shouldn't be spending more than $2,500. Now, this is going to kind of give you a recommended budget, which what I like is that I didn't have to sit down and come up with these numbers. They just auto-populated a budget for me based on my income this month. Now, for an artist.
So just one question regarding this
yes.
template. Is this accessible to people?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You may have to ask for permission just because it's like a Google Doc. So if you do have to ask for permission, just go ahead and like request access to the document. But I'm going to go ahead and just drop the link in the chat box, and anybody who's here can access this spreadsheet. Definitely.
Great. And I'll also get the link and share it with anyone who has RSVP today. And just also to let folks know, there is the option of you putting questions in the chat. Like someone had just asked if you could show the whole spreadsheet, but since you're putting the link in, they can actually get access to it. Now, just so I'm clear, they're going to get access to it, but it'll be their own version. Right?
That's right.
So,
what you want to do when you open it, you want to go to File, Make a Copy. So immediately when you get this template, this is just a template, and I have it in my folder called Budget Baby. I got all my budget stuff in there. But if for you could go ahead and call this Dexter's monthly budget and debt repayment plan and save it in your own Google Drive. So once you make a copy, it's your version. You can edit it. You won't be able to edit this one because this is my template, but you can totally make a copy of it. Got it. So what I was going to say was, for artists, right? You might be looking at this and go, yeah, but my income varies every month, but my rent doesn't. So this doesn't really make sense. So what I would do is I would figure out what all of your fixed expenses are, and then your average income that you've made. So you're going to have to kind of go through, pull up your financial accounts for the past 90 days, for the past 120 days. What's that average been? And make your budget template, your kind of bare bones budget, using that amount, right? Because you got to make sure you can cover those basics, those bases. And then once you can cover those bases, you can kind of move on and say, well, then when I have extra, I'll figure out what I want to do with that. Artists are very much constantly in this like feast and famine mode, right? Like there's going to be times where all my invoices were paid and now I'm like feast mode. I got all this money, right? Like this month here where I got a speaking event and I got another, I got paid nice $9,000, but there's going to be a month where you only make $1,500 total and your rent might be $2,000. So in those moments of feast, you have to remember to set money aside specifically with the intention that when famine mode comes, you're going to have some cushion set aside. Because the reality is, if you just spend it all during that feast mode and you're just celebrating, and when that next famine comes, you are really going to be upset with yourself, because you're going to constantly think back to, oh, but I had the money, I had it. And that regret psychologically puts stress on you. I mean, you're not going to be able to sleep well. You're going to be so mad at yourself. We don't want that. So think about that feast famine when you're setting up your budget, using an average amount to figure out your baseline. And then of course, from there, you can adjust. But I think the spreadsheet is a great starting point. I've been using it for years. And at the very end, there's a debt plan, which I do recommend you have. If you have any kind of debt, there's a free tool that I love, which is called whatsthecost.com. It's a bit old school, but it's my favorite. It's the one that I have found that just allows you to get a very clear picture of what to put in your budget for how much money you're going to send to each debt that you have. Most people don't just have one debt account. They might have multiple. So in this case, let's say I have 3 debts. I would go onto this calculator and put 3 debts. I'm going to put them in interest rate order because mathematically that saves you the most money in interest. And then I'm going to type in, okay, every month, after my rent's paid, my groceries are set, everything's kind of my bare minimum responsibilities are covered. How much will I set aside for debt payments? So let's say for me, that amount's going to be $430. Okay, great. So now I go in and I tell them all the details for my debt accounts. Maybe the first one's a car loan. Maybe the next one is my student loan. Maybe the last one is a credit card. I'm going to go in here and put all the loans that I have, and it put the balance that I owe, right? So you want to be specific to your, your amounts. You don't want to put mine, but I'm going to give you just a quick example. And then once you put in everything that you have, the interest rates that you have on your loans, you have all these specific details that they're asking. And then it's going to ask you, what's the minimum payment that you need to make on these? So you'll go ahead here and, enter that minimum, what they're charging me every month. And then, once you're done with that, you can hit the calculate button, and it'll tell you pretty much a very specific plan. So it'll tell you here, starting this month, coming up December 2023, you're going to send $500. You're going to send $110 to your credit card. Even though the balance is $500, you're just going to send $110 for now. And you're going to do that for the next 4 months. And then the 5th month, you'll be able to make a smaller payment and your credit card will be paid off. That's assuming you stop using it. No new charges on there, right? But this is a goal specifically to become debt-free on a specific day. So for me, this is just a beautiful way to set my plan in a way where, okay, every month, $430 from my budget goes towards debt payments. But what is the breakdown of those $430? Boom, here it is right here. 110 goes to my credit card, 210 goes to my car loan, 110 goes to my student loan. And then the amount of interest that I'm paying each month is here. My total debt amount shown getting lower and lower. Once one is paid, you put more towards the next highest interest rate account. And then when that one's paid, you put all 430 towards the final one. And you'll be debt free by 2026. So this is for someone who owes on 4 accounts at these rates and these amounts, and who can afford $430 a month. If they can afford to put more, they'll get out of debt faster. If they can afford to put less towards debt, it will take them a little longer. But the point is, for us, sometimes we get caught up in how much should I send? When should I make my payment? How much to this account versus that one? That's done for you. So you can not have to worry about that kind of stress. And you can just, focus on the other aspects of your life that matter so much more than these nitty-gritty specific figures.
Well, that's brilliant, and I'm sure people will find this incredibly useful. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, going back to the idea of discipline. I know that for some people, if the money's if they have one account, one bank account, which a lot of people do, it's normal, right? And it's connected to their debit card, and they also use it for their Netflix expenses, and everything's coming out as one account. It's really difficult, I think, to keep track of things when you only have one account. I firmly believe that having more than one bank account is incredibly important. And it's funny because I mentioned that to someone some years ago, that maybe you should have 3 bank accounts. And they looked at me like I was crazy, because they were like, doesn't that seem suspicious? And I said, what are you talking about? You're like, are you first of all, it's not like you have millions of dollars you're moving around in different bank accounts.
That's a different story.
Laundering money. Like, nobody cares about, the amounts of money we're talking about here. And on top of that, banks are not going to look at you suspicious because you say, I don't want to just have one checking account. I need to have a savings account, 2 checking accounts, and another account for emergency funds, because I don't want it all tied together. And what the banks will sometimes do, and I have a 21-year-old son who just started an LLC business. He's in college, but he just kind of I don't need to get into all the details of that. But the reason I'm bringing it up is I do this stuff in practice. It's not just me talking to other people. Like, I even within the context of my family, I'm like, no, this is what you need to do. Even to my own son, who's 21. But I remember we were talking about the account, and I said, when you go to the bank, because he's in Washington, D.C., I said, when you go to the bank, do not let them talk you into something that you do not want to do, right? Just because they will try. Right.
They're hardest.
I was like, you don't have to walk out of there with a credit card. You don't have to walk out of there with a type of account that you don't need. Go there. This is exactly what you need to do. And the reason I bring this up is that it's been my experience in business over the course of the past 25 some odd years, that I've gone to banks with one thing in mind and feel like all this pressure to do something else. And I'm like, no, I don't need these accounts connected to a debit card.
Yep.
Yeah. And they look, and I've had people at banks years ago like look at me and go, oh, you don't want to have access to your money? I was like, no, I have access to my money. I can come here and get it, or I can go online and wire it or move it around. I don't need to have a debit card in my pocket for every single bank account I have. The temptation is too high. You're just like, and so removing that temptation from the equation is important. And the reason I say all of that is that I know for some people, they like to keep it real basic, right? So the spreadsheet you shared, I think that's a wonderful tool, and I really recommend that people use it. The website you shared, it's a wonderful tool. I also recommend that people use it, but there's nothing wrong with a pen and paper if you have to go that route. Like there's nothing wrong with just having a notebook, and make it a nice one, right? Like get yourself a nice one. That way, like you feel good when you're opening it up. It's not just some $2 spiral notebook, right? It doesn't have to be $100 Moleskine either. You get something in the middle.
I mean, something in the middle makes sense. But I agree with you. I think that when you enjoy the materials that you're using, right? I mean, think of it as an art project, right? Like when you enjoy the medium, when it's your thing, like when the colors are aesthetically pleasing to you, that's just going to add a little bit more joy factor. And the more joy factor we can infuse in these dull and dry routines that require a lot of discipline, but don't have a lot of fun factor, right? Like we have to infuse the joy factor wherever we can. If that's color coding it with your favorite, Sharpies, if that's whatever that means for you, if that's creating visual trackers every week, you're going to go in and color and fill in whatever it is, right? That to me is just adding that joy factor that you need to ensure that you're actually going to enjoy doing it, even just a little bit, making you more likely to show up, be consistent, have the discipline, because we know that's the hardest part. The reason why so many people create a budget, have a great valiant first attempt, and then never come back and do the actual budgeting, the verb part, is because they don't enjoy it. There's no joy factor.
I think that's incredibly true. I also think that there's a psychological barrier that some people have around even budgeting. And I want to spend a moment on this because it's come up in different conversations I've had with creative people, not just artists, but people in the creative field in general. There's this feeling that, like capitalism is evil.
Yeah.
I'm not here to debate that.
Well, that's for another webinar. That's for another night.
That's another webinar. But it's hard for them to think about their budget without thinking about capitalism.
Yeah.
And so the feeling that capitalism is evil is standing in the way of being honest with themselves about their own financial life.
Yeah.
And in a way, and this is kind of hard to say, but I'll say it anyway. In a way, the feeling that capitalism is evil is being used as an excuse to not deal with the financial realities of their life.
Your capital. Yeah.
Right. It's been said in many different ways that, if you hate something, it's certainly not going to be something you want to spend time dealing with. Right. So my recommendation is to remove whatever stigma or feeling one might have about capitalism, which obviously is problematic in many ways. We know that. Right. But recognize that managing your own financial life, and a budget is part of a bigger picture, but managing your own financial life is a matter of survival. It is not a matter of like your political inclinations or the other things that you might be spending your time thinking about. It is the fact that if you're in America, and most, America-like countries, budgeting and your financial life is a matter of survival. 100%. Like you have to do it. And as an artist or person in the creative field, I think you're in a magical place. And I'll tell you why. Very few fields exist where someone can make an object and find someone that's willing to pay them, in some cases, large amounts of money for the object you just created. Now, I know that doesn't apply to every artist, and it's, and I get it, that there's certain types of art that are not commodified in that way. But for the sake of like putting some guardrails on the conversation here, if you're a visual artist working with materials, you're in a position that is quite unique. And when the check comes in, whether someone buys something from you for $500 or $5,000, $1,000 or $20,000, whatever it is, just know that 99% of the people on this planet have to work for hours or days or weeks or months or maybe even an entire year to see that $20,000. Just think about what that means. So how special a position you're in. So to then take that and to not manage it, it's kind of crazy, right? Like it's like you're in a magical place, right? So if you get that check, take a portion of that, put it into your emergency fund, be hard on yourself, not emotionally.
Yeah.
Be hard on yourself, like with the discipline. Right?
The tough love that you need.
It's like it's, and I'm talking from my own personal experiences as well. I had to do that years ago to start getting to the places that I wanted to get to. And everyone's life is different and circumstances is different. And some people have a much harder life, much harder time, more dependence, aging parents that they're also taking care of. So they're kind of squeezed between their own children and their aging parents. They still have the college debt. I mean, life can be brutal. It can be brutal.
Absolutely.
You know,
I love what you're saying. And there's actually a part of my book that I included, which talks about this same idea. But for me, it's how dare I not take advantage of the financial opportunities and access that I have as an American that my parents never had as immigrants, right? As, you know, coming here to the US, not being born here in America, right? They never had access to the type of education that I have here because their country, you know, they didn't have access to the best schools so far away, they had to stop going. How dare I take advantage of my access to education and learning? How dare I mean, they didn't get the type of jobs where you could get a retirement account. So if I get that type of job and I have a retirement account, how dare I not take advantage and just ignore it? It's disrespectful to my parents. It's disrespectful to every person who wished, who was withheld. That opportunity was withheld from them. And here I am getting that opportunity and that access and just completely letting it go fall to the wayside, not paying attention to it, right? Not treating it with the respect that it's due. And for me, that's why like I became so passionate about investing for my retirement. Because, and for those of you who follow, like there's a whole movement called financial independence, retire early. I stumbled upon that community online a couple of years ago. And like, I, you know, fell down the rabbit hole, just reading about folks who would retire early in their 30s and their 40s by aggressively investing a large percentage of their income in their teens and 20s. And so I kind of went down the rabbit hole. I realized, okay, this probably isn't going to work for me given my family situation and the responsibilities that I have to my parents and to my siblings. But there's one piece of that did work for me, which was Coast Fire. Coast Fire is when you invest a certain amount of money and from then on you can coast. You can stop adding investments to your account because you reached a certain balance that will on its own grow and compound with the returns of the market. If you're investing in a stock market or index fund or, you know, mutual fund investment account, that is going to continue to grow and compound so that when you reach age of retirement, let that, you know, be 60, 65, 67, that you will have enough to retire with dignity, even though you didn't continuously add money throughout your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, right? So for me, I felt like, how dare I not take advantage of a Roth IRA investment account, of, you know, my ability to be able to just go onto any app today, open it with a Wi-Fi connection and $1, I can purchase a share of an ETF or a fractional share of an ETF or of a stock, right? How dare I not? So for you to say like that, when we think about the opportunity and the magic that artists are able to live in, right? To be able to actually turn your craft and your passion into money, that deserves respect. That deserves for you to acknowledge, how dare I not treat this the way that it should be? There's so many people out there who will never have this access, this opportunity that I have. So let me, you know, kind of approach this with a bit of humility, right? And recognize that and have that gratitude as the base upon which you create your foundation for your finances.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's great. Someone just put a very, I think, you know, wonderful statement in the chat, and that is, truth is, the ease of getting opportunities and the tendencies for mismanagement go hand in hand most times. It takes a healthy dose of discipline and awareness to not grow financially complacent and irresponsible. That is absolutely brilliant and on point. it's so wild because I'm not an artist, but I've worked with so many artists, and for such a long time that I've kind of seen so many different situations, right?
Yeah.
And not all bad, right? I've seen some artists in wonderful financial situations that they never thought they would find themselves in, and I've seen the opposite of that. You know, life is complicated. But what I've seen more of though is this sort of tendency to always think that the sales are going to keep coming in.
That's right.
And to start adjusting one's lifestyle. They call that lifestyle creep, right? Where
Yes.
the more money you make, the more debt you take on, the
Yeah, and then the
more
more you
the,
spend.
the fancier the car, the fancier the apartment, the
Yeah.
fancier the clothes, the fancier, and then a year and a half later, things change for any number of reasons that you can't control, and you cannot maintain all of those new things that you've kind of taken on. And it's embarrassing, it's emotionally debilitating.
Right.
It can make the creative process very, very difficult. And I would take a moment on that too. I think that as I mentioned, I think that artists, visual artists, any creative person who's able to take their creativity and turn it into income is a very, very special situation. But that also means that your emotional state and your mental health, it's really important to keep those things in a good place, because I don't know too many creative people, even if you're a writer, I don't know too many creative people who can do their best work when they're stressed out and can't eat and can't sleep and worried
That's
and
right.
not focused. Like, so if you can avoid getting yourself into that place mentally, you're going to do better work, which in turn is going to make your income opportunities even greater. And also people are going to see that, like it shows up. I think it shows up in you physically as well. And I don't just
100%.
mean the clothes you're wearing.
No, no, no. The stress you carry in your shoulders, your physical health, your mental health. I mean, it starts to show up everywhere. And it's funny because your financial health is just one aspect. There's so many aspects to your wellness and your health, and people love to just focus on the physical and mental health. But your financial health and wellness is so much intertwined with your, longevity, right? The wealthier you are, the more long your lifespan is likely to be, the better your healthcare is likely to be, the better quality of food that you get access to, right? Your living arrangement, you have better access to better quality air. I mean, so when we think about how money can transform your life, it's wild to think that you wouldn't really focus on it and have as much care and the kind of way that we craft our passions, that we wouldn't craft a financial plan in that same way, or give it that much kind of like TLC that it deserves. Because I mean, yeah, it's wild. Like your security, your entire ability to provide for yourself and your family is dependent on how you can control and manage your money. And it's funny because as you were talking, I pulled up the stat real quick because I didn't want to butcher it, but according to the National Endowment for Financial Education, 70% of lottery winners, all lottery winners throughout history, 70% go completely bankrupt within just a few years of their winnings being collected.
It's amazing. And it's funny because that's like the urban legend, right? And then it's like fact, right? Like people hear it and they're like, oh, that can't be true. You can't win $50 million and be broke in 4
You
years.
sure
And I'm
can.
like, yeah, I can tell you exactly. I haven't done that, just to be clear, but I can tell you exactly how that happens, right?
Yeah,
It's just 3 mistakes, right?
that's right.
Mistake number one, you buy a $25 million house, right? A mansion.
And
Like,
don't
so
calculate the
like,
property taxes on
right,
that every year.
right, right. Like mistake number one is you buy too much, you buy too much property that you can't pay for the taxes and maintain. And again, it doesn't have to be 25 million, but that's the illustration
You
of the
get the
point.
picture. Right.
Number two is you don't pay your taxes. Right. I could stop there. That'll put, you'll
That
be
is
done.
alone. That right there
That's,
is probably 99% of those
that's
folks.
the double tap right there,
Yes.
But then the third one would be, thinking you have to take care of all your family and friends'
Everybody.
needs.
That's right.
Then you're done. Like
That's
the
right.
money's gone, right? So it doesn't matter if 50 million, 50,000. Like if you make those kinds of mistakes,
Yeah.
it's done. So that leads me to something else, because we're getting down to like the final 11 minutes here. This has been
Let's
great.
do
So
it.
this
Yes.
leads me to something else I want to bring up. So you've shared a lot of personal things. I want to share like 2 personal things. All right.
Yeah. Let's go for it.
So I've never filed for bankruptcy, but there was a time in my life where I could have. Like the circumstances, and again, back to this whole financial crisis, business going down,
Right.
no clients. This is before I really got my feet underneath me in the art world. So this is not the Dexter you're seeing today. This is like almost 20 years ago, like crazy town. There was like crazy stuff going on, right?
Yeah.
So I could have filed for bankruptcy. I decided I wasn't going to because I just knew there was another way out for me. Right. And without boring you with the details, I just figured out how to reconfigure my business life in a way that it wouldn't necessitate that. But the reason I was able to do that, and this is where that was kind of personal, but here's like the other thing. I grew up in a single parent house for a while, and then my mother, was with a partner. So then I basically, most of my memories growing up was just my siblings and my mom. Like, so that meant there wasn't a lot of money around. My mother's from rural Georgia. She was born in Camilla, Georgia in 1951. My mother passed away some years ago, but the point is, she lived a great life. Don't be sad.
But for your loss, but not for her life.
But the point is, my mother,
yeah,
the person, I'm here. I feel like a young person, even though I'm not that young. But my mother grew up when Black people couldn't vote in America. Just my mother.
Right.
So I'm only one generation outside of so many things not being accessible to African Americans. I'm just one generation out of that. So there was a certain amount of responsibility I felt at that kind of inflection point, right? Where I was just going to do it a different way. And then I was looking at all of these, I'm just going to be blunt. I was looking at all of these white businessmen and women on television.
Yeah.
Who were also going through their own financial throes at that same time because of, this market being down, businesses failing, all of the stuff that was going on around then, and the housing crisis, et cetera. And their approach to their debt was so different than the approach to debt that so many of my peers were going through, my Black and brown peers, right? And again, this is not just purely a racial issue, so don't get me wrong. I'm just talking about my own experience. This is just me. This is not New York Academy of Arts opinion. This is Dexter Wimberly's opinion, right?
And experience.
So culturally, what I was seeing is that a lot of the non-Black people that I, or white business people that I was sort of like observing, well, basically like, the market's down, our business is going to fail. Oh, we'll file for Chapter 11. We'll sell the house at a loss. We'll just kind of keep it moving. And they didn't have the same sort of like emotional baggage that I felt. Now, maybe they were hiding some of it. People are good at hiding. I get that.
Very true.
But I felt like the guilt that I was feeling about my financial situation was not present in their calculation of their financial situation. It was just stone cold.
Transactional.
This is how much money we need
transactional.
to make. Just a transaction. Sell that at a loss. Buy this. Do that. And I said, wait a second here. Why do I have to carry all of this like emotional weight around this stuff? I don't need to do that. And I started approaching my personal finances very, very differently. I mean, I still get emotional. I'm a passionate person. I think I do the right thing whenever the opportunity to do the right thing is in front of me versus doing the wrong thing. I do the right thing. But I had to remove all of that sort of like guilt and generational baggage and judgment that I was putting myself through. And then the last thing I'll say before I hand it off to you, because I want you to finish us out today, is that I remember getting a call from a credit card like debt collector around that same time, right? And it was a small balance on the card that I had not paid, right? So the call was warranted. Like it was, he had every right to call. But this person's attitude was so disgusting. It was so egregious the way this person was behaving, because again, it wasn't the card company, it was some debt collector they had kind of like pawned it off
agency.
That it changed the way I thought about dealing with debt as well, because I said, I'm not going to be talked to that way. I'm not going to be dealt with that way.
Right.
And I turned the tables on this person by basically taking some of that cold hard calculation that I had before. My response was, whatever the amount is, this is the amount that I'm going to pay, because this is the amount that I can pay. Now, you can do whatever else it is you think you want to say or do. You can call 50 times, you can do backflips, but you're only going to get $50 a month. That's it.
What's going to happen.
So that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And you could be happy with it or not, but that's what I'm sending it. And eventually he was like, okay.
Right.
Okay.
Because some money's better than no money. Right. So they're going to take that.
Just a little personal anecdote, but I want to pass it back to you.
No, I love those nuggets, because at the end of the day, those are the moments where you'll never forget, like, because something went off in your mind, like you switched to learning something that you just either, for whatever reason, either didn't know it before, or for some reason it was a block that didn't allow you to accept that or receive that. And so these experiences, like, clearly have stayed with you. They're very profound. And I have those moments too. And for me, that's why so much of money is not just the financial stuff. It's the storytelling, right? My whole book is a combination of stories and strategies. Yes, there's the financial stuff, but really through our lived experiences, that's how we connect with other humans. That's how we learn. I remember stories and gossip much more than I remember information that I read in a textbook. So, for me, the stories have to come first. And I had a gem here that I wanted to share, but then of course, I know there's some questions that we can get to in the last couple of minutes, but for me, the gem is the 25X rule. This really gave me some sense of like peace and freedom in my finances. The 25X rule is when you figure out how much you need to basically be okay for the remainder of your life, even if you never worked again and never had any income again. So that would be figuring out how much you need to live off of, or you're comfortable living off of annually, and multiplying that by 25. So for me, I was like, okay, let's say the worst possible lifestyle that I could imagine is going to be, let's say $4,000, $3,000 a month. And I'm going to multiply that by 12 months in a year. So that means $4,000 times 12 months, which is my bare minimum that I want to set myself up for. That's $48,000 a year. So that yearly amount, I need to multiply times 25. That's the 25X rule, to find out what is my amount that I need to reach to be okay to pull the $48,000 that I need every year for the rest of my life, even if I never earn any more income. So that would be for $48,000, the 25X rule would give you 25 times 48,000, $1.2 million. So how can I reach $1.2 million as fast as possible so that I can be okay that, hey, even if I don't have money coming in, I have enough now to be able to sustain myself year and year and year and year in my retirement, right? So for me, that looks like pulling up a compounding calculator, and saying, all right, right now I'm 33 years old. If I want to plan to stop working when I'm 63, I've got exactly 30 years to get my stuff together. So let's say I start today with $500 and I add $500 every single month, which is going to be about $6,000 a year. And then I leave this for 30 years. And let's say we just do the average interest rate you would get from the stock market in the United States. So investing in every single publicly traded stock in America through an investment fund, like an index fund or an exchange traded fund that captures the entire stock market. That averages over 20, 30, 40 years, about 8-9%. So I'm going to go ahead and put in 8.5, just, between 8 and 9. And I'm going to hit calculate. That gets me almost there. Now I'm at $814,000. I need to get to 1.2. So I'm close, but not quite there. Close, but no cigar. So what do I need to do? Do I need to either add more each year, or do I need to push my retirement from 63 to 65 and give myself an extra 2 years? Now I'm super close to $1 million if I wait till 65 instead of 63. And now let's say I do $1,000 to start, right? So now I'm going to double down on my initial starting investment. That gets me closer to $980,000. Now I need to figure out how much each year do I need to contribute to reach that 1.2 million. This, again, is just my safety. This is my baseline, that if anything ever happened, I'm going to be able to take $48,000 out once a year, every year, and never run out of money because of the 25X rule. And the reason the 25X rule works is because you're only taking out 4% of the total balance of your investment account. and you're leaving the other 96% to continue to grow and compound in the market. So because of that, you're only relying on a very small percentage of your investments. And that's why you can sort of rest assured that you won't run out of money, because the remainder, that other 96%, will continue to grow. So for me, let's say that means, okay, I need to figure out a way to put in, maybe I'm putting in $8,000 a year, and that gets me to 1.3 million. And I got to start with 1,000. What if I were to start with 500? Would that get me to 1.2? Yes. So what this means is that today I need to put $500 into an investment account, and then I need to commit 8,000 per year for the remaining 32 years. So 80,000 or 8,000 a year broken down by month is about $666 a month. So that means if I want to bring that down to weekly, that's about $166 every single week. If I can commit $166 every Friday for the next 32 years, I will be able to stop working at 65, enjoy my retirement with $48,000 every single year without running out of money. Now, of course, that's not ideal. People want to have a more comfortable retirement, but that's my baseline. That's me knowing that I'm good. I'm not going to be retiring in a situation that is completely uncomfortable or sad to see or disheartening or hard to imagine. I'm going to have at least the ability to retire with dignity. So for me, learning that 25X rule allowed me to make a plan for, okay, what do I got to do? And really focus on that small amount every week that I need to invest, 150. If I can do more, great. But I know that at least I have to set aside that in my budget so that I can retire with dignity. Because I don't want to be working when I'm 78, 92 years old, still working, because not that I want to work, but because I don't have a choice, because I need to rely on that income. And so this for me, I think, was huge. And hopefully some of you all will go run your 25X calculations and adjust your budget so that you know you're giving yourself and your future self the ability to have a dignified retirement.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think that, we've come into the end here. All of the resources that you mentioned, the links and what have you, obviously, folks, we could drop some of these into the chat.
Yes, I'm going to drop the link to this entire slide deck into the chat. So here,
and also as a follow-up, we'll try to get these links and email it to everyone who showed up for today's webinar. This has been wonderful. Obviously, we recommend everyone go and pick up your book. Congratulations on your, first time, authorship. It's really wonderful. Knowing you for a few years now, so it's great to see your journey. And I hope this has been helpful for people. I just think that, budgeting is one of those things that's so core, so key. And I love that you ended on how to get from where you are right now to like that $1.2 million in 30 years or so, because it's all achievable. All these things are achievable, even with modest amounts of money.
It's right? Little by little, right? It feels like, oh my God, I need $1 million. No, but you don't need $1 million right now. You can do it little by little, but you have to include it in your budget, and you have to make room for that.
And if you're an artist, this will be the last thing I'll say before we
could go on another hour, Dexter.
If you're an artist, that calculator that you showed at the end, if you're an artist, you can hack that, because you might make $10,000, $20,000, $5,000 out of the blue, 15 out of the blue, another 10 out of the blue, and you can just add that into that equation, and all of a sudden you're knocking years off of that goal. Like you can, if you're able to like throw in an additional 20K out of the blue, it's like, wow.
Yes, that's that feast famine, right? That's that feast famine equation.
Yeah,
it's making sure you're appropriately behaving with your money during those feast times so that you can prepare. Because otherwise, you're feasting and you're not paying attention to the long term, the future, and also that there are going to be times of famine that are going to come inevitably, and you got to be prepared for that. So yeah, it feels great to have this abundance of money come in, but it's a false sense of abundance if you're not spreading it out throughout the time during which you're going to need it. You're just focusing on how you're going to use it all now. That's, kind of the big red flag there. But yeah, you make a great point, Dexter. And thank you so much for inviting me. Like, honestly, I love these conversations. I saw a couple of the questions in the Q&A box. It looks like we answered almost all of them. There was one about CPAs. I would actually recommend that you find a certified financial advisor who is a fee-only fiduciary advisor, and they tend to work with CPAs that can function with, you know, a budget that fluctuates a lot, like a creative professional, or a steady budget. So finding someone who has, you know, relationships with accountants that work with different types of clients, rather than just trying to go straight to an accountant. I find that if you go to a fee-only fiduciary advisor first and kind of do a big financial plan, maybe like one meeting, sit down, you know, get that big picture financial plan, and then have them refer you to an accountant. That's worked for me and some of my friends. But I think that's all. I think we got all the questions in the Q&A box.
Well, thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you, everyone who showed up for this conversation. It will be on New York Academy of Arts YouTube channel. So anyone who missed it, the link will be there. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.